And good evening once again. Day 107 of the Biden administration. The president making a relentless push now for his agenda and his multi-trillion-dollar proposals to set our country on a new course. Yet he may now have to contend with even more intense resistance from a Republican Party devoting itself more and more to Donald Trump and the big lie. In response, they've set in motion what amounts to a national movement to pass new state laws restricting voting. All of it as if to remedy voter fraud that did not take place. The latest effort playing out tonight in Texas, where lawmakers are debating a new voting law amid vocal opposition. This one would increase criminal penalties for some voting irregularities and greatly empower partisan poll watchers on the day of the vote. Earlier today, in what amounted to a photo op carried live on Fox News, Florida's Governor DeSantis signed their new voting law, which is largely aimed at curbing mail-in voting access. All other news outlets other than Fox News were denied access to the event, something DeSantis clearly didn't think was a problem.
Why did you only allow Fox News to capture the moment you signed the controversial election bill?
We were happy to give them the exclusive on that, and I think it went really, really well.
For the record, Fox says it didn't request the event to be an exclusive, didn't ask for the other networks to be locked out. The developments in Texas and Florida follow that Georgia law passed back in March that also limited mail-in ballots. Several voting and civil rights organizations have filed suits to block Florida's law, including the NAACP, which calls it, quote, a blatant and calculated attack on the right to vote and a horrifying reminder of the fragility of democracy. Earlier today, former Obama campaign manager David Plouffe had this warning.
This is a DEFCON 1 moment for democracy. We're not threatened by other nations or enemies. It's a threat from within. Democracy is hanging by the thinnest thread in our country's history.
As others have raised, it's no coincidence here that this is happening as the Republican Party undergoes what appears to be a purge of those seen as insufficiently loyal to Donald Trump. Party members in the House are on track for a vote next week to remove Congresswoman Liz Cheney from their leadership ranks because she refuses to stay quiet about Trump and the big lie. Her replacement will likely be Elise Stefanik of upstate New York, who today showcased her total willingness to promote that lie on a podcast hosted by ex-Trump White House strategist Steve Bannon.
When you talk to any voter across this country, certainly at any Republican event, they are focused on election security and election integrity. It is important to stand up for these constitutional issues. And these are questions that are going to have to be answered before we head into the 2022 midterms so that the American people have faith in our election system. I fully support the audit in Arizona. We want transparency and answers for the American people. We need to fix these election security issues going into the future.
All of that right out of the Trump playbook. That Arizona audit the Congresswoman referred to, ongoing in Maricopa County, it was commissioned by Republicans there. It involves recounting over 2 million already recounted ballots. Stefanik didn't just push the dubious claim about the need for election security during her interview with Steve Bannon. She also made a pitch for a job in House Republican leadership.
This is also about being one team, and I'm committed to being a voice and being sending a clear message that we are one team, and that means working with the president and working with all of our excellent Republican members of Congress.
Well, Jonathan, I'd like to begin with you and your beat. You described this phase of the Biden presidency as his most perilous. Why is that?
Well, Brian, the first 100 days, of course, was dominated by the response to the pandemic in terms of increasing the number of vaccines out to Americans. And as you just read, they've certainly had real success with that, even though, of course, there are some who are still hesitant to take the vaccine, and they've got work to do there. Also, it was easy to kind of get all the oars rowing in the same direction in terms of Democrats in dealing with COVID really first. That was a slam dunk as the first move. It now gets harder. He didn't have Republican support then. He's got even less now. We heard from Mitch McConnell this week saying his goal was 100%, to quote him, block the administration's agenda, that the president is attempting, once again today, to reach out in a bipartisan fashion for his infrastructure and jobs plan. And to this point, Republicans are saying no, because they object to the idea of raising taxes for the wealthiest Americans or for large corporations. Now, what the White House is doing is trying to aim over the heads of Republican lawmakers on Capitol Hill to Republican voters themselves who, per polling, like these ideas, but also local Republicans, mayors, governors, including the one today in Lake Charles, who introduced President Biden to this event, said, hey, there's a lot of things we disagree about, but one thing we do agree about, the need for infrastructure, the need to repair this bridge behind us, and the need for disaster relief. So the stakes are high and the clock is ticking. The White House knows that historically the party in power, the party that has the presidency, loses at the midterms, those midway through the first term, and Biden and Democrats have historically slim margins. So this will be tough to get this through. And beyond this, turning to even thornier issues like policing or voting rights, it only gets harder from here.
Lisa, great to have you back on the broadcast. I have for you a piece from Susan Glasser tonight in the New Yorker. Headline gives it away. Forced to choose between Trump's big lie and Liz Cheney, the House GOP chooses the lie. She writes, if Trump does manage to reinvent the big lie in service of his own corrupt ends, Cheney will at least have forced members of her party into admitting on the record that they are making a choice between truth and Trump's untruth and choosing the latter. And I guess that would be something of a victory for the pro-Liz Cheney forces. But, Lisa, in terms of your reporting, how many elected Republicans privately agree that it was a big lie, yet would never dare to cross the man they bow to publicly?
Well, even if they privately agree that the sort of conspiracy theories and baseless claims that the election was falsely decided, even if they know those things are baseless, they're not, very few of them are willing to say it publicly. Look, this big lie is baked in the firmament of the Republican Party. I spend a lot of time talking to county Republican chairs and local activists, and overwhelmingly, they tell me that the number one issue they're concerned about is not the pandemic or the economy, but is whether the election was fairly decided. And they believe that it was not, and they want to litigate that again and again and again with no end seemingly in sight. So it becomes really hard for elected officials to break with the base of their party. But this is a situation of their own doing. They fed these lies to their constituents for weeks, for months. And so it's not surprising that people would start to believe them, quite frankly. But it may put Republicans in a tough spot come the midterms. And there are some Republican strategists who worry that this is not the right message, because it's a message that will resonate with the Republican base. You look at polling, and 70% of Republicans or so will say in surveys that they believe Biden was not elected in a legitimate way. But it does not resonate with the mainstream of the country. When you look at numbers for independent voters, they don't even hit 30% of voters agreeing with that statement. So Republicans are pushing this message that really isn't in touch with where the general electorate is. And at the same time, they're essentially giving President Biden a free pass to push his message, to promote his plans for the economic recovery, to push his infrastructure package, to talk about how many vaccines he's getting out there. And so Democratic strategists, when I've talked to them in recent days, think this is great. They see it as a win-win for Biden, and they hope that the Republicans keep talking about this issue right up until the midterm elections.
Great point about the free pass for Biden, who needs every bit of it. Hey, Neil, on the legal front, this is clearly a wave effort to restrict voting rights. Florida is just the latest. And here's the question. What is the ability, even for, say, the formidable Sherrilyn Ifill, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, what is the ability of outside forces, however well organized, argued, financed, to reach in and perhaps reverse something signed into a law by the governor of a state like Florida?
Well, Brian, there's a legal problem, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But even before getting there, there's a big kind of political/governance problem, because I think what the Republican embraces of these voting restrictions and the big lie is, I think it's three things. I mean, first, it really suggests a real lack of seriousness on the part of the Republican Party. I think I just heard Lisa say that the big lie is baked into the Republican firmament, but it's baked like Cheech and Chong. I mean, it's like unserious. It's not reality. It's contradicted by the facts that 60 different courts, many of whom were Republican appointees, rejected all this. And does any serious person actually think that this big lie is right? And I don't think like Rudy Giuliani released Stefanik count in that. I mean, so that's one thing. The second is it's really bad news for the future of the Republican Party, because, normally when you lose something, like if I lose a Supreme Court case, I sit there and I do a post-mortem. Why did I lose? How did I not get a vote? And good politicians, of course, do that after an election too. But what the Trump Republican Party has done is not engage in that introspection one bit. Instead, it's, you did everything right. It must be someone else's fault. And then lastly, it really suggests a kind of lack of public spiritedness on the part of the party. I mean, government service at its core is about something bigger than yourself. And it's not about, you could see that in Al Gore or the Chief Justice or whomever. And, our entire system is based on the idea that people will wield their power responsibly. Citizens with speech, presidents with presidential power. When you have someone like Trump come in and shatter all of that, that's when you have real problems. And so now we have these laws passed. And yes, they're the Florida law was challenged within 9 minutes. What took them so long? I think there are some very strong legal challenges, but we shouldn't be having the courts we shouldn't be having to rely on the courts to fix this. This should have been fixed at the get-go at the legislative stage.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.